The neighborhood had always looked peaceful from the outside, with its perfectly trimmed hedges, symmetrical mailboxes, and strangely identical lawns that made every house blend into the next. But beneath that calm surface existed an HOA board obsessed with control, far beyond what any normal homeowner association would dare to enforce. For years they had pushed rules tighter, fines heavier, and surveillance stronger. Yet no one suspected that their reach had quietly extended into the sky. The story began the day the narrator noticed a faint buzzing sound above his backyard. It wasn't loud enough to startle, just soft enough to be ignored if someone wasn't paying attention. But he was paying attention. The buzzing didn't move like a random hobby drone, it stopped, hovered, angled itself, and then hovered again. It felt intentional. Almost calculated. He brushed it off at first, thinking maybe a kid nearby had gotten a new toy, but the uneasy feeling lingered, threading itself deeper every time he stepped outside. Gradually, the buzzing became a daily visitor. Morning, evening, sometimes late into the night when no drone should realistically be flying. The narrator noticed patterns, how it lingered longer when he opened his garage, how it dipped lower when he brought tools into his backyard, how it even followed him when he walked to the community park. A paranoia started growing, but not the kind born from imagination. This paranoia had evidence. Patterns. Consistency. A purpose. It wasn't until he received a strange letter from the HOA that everything clicked into place. The letter claimed he had been violating multiple HOA rules, rules he hadn't even known existed. It listed infractions like extended driveway use, unauthorized tool storage, and even unapproved backyard modifications. The strangest part was that none of these violations were visible from the street or shared areas. They were things someone would only know if they had seen his backyard directly. Or worse, watched him. That night, the drone returned again, hovering a bit too low, its tiny red light blinking like an eye that refused to blink. The narrator felt the weight of realization settle in. The HOA wasn't guessing. They weren't making assumptions. They were watching. What began as annoyance grew into anger. And anger quickly evolved into determination. The narrator started monitoring the drone, tracking its movement, timing its visits. He documented everything, timestamps, altitudes, behavioral patterns. With each passing day, the truth became clearer, the drone wasn't privately owned. It was operated by someone with authority. Someone who had access to HOA complaint logs. Someone who wasn't bothered by legality or privacy. The HOA board. They had crossed a line, and not just a small one. They had violated privacy, trespassed airspace, and weaponized surveillance. But instead of confronting them directly, the narrator took a different path. He knew that if he reacted too soon, the HOA would deny everything and bury the evidence. They held too much influence, too much power, and too much confidence in their invisible operations. They believed no one would ever catch them. So he kept silent. Observing. Waiting. Planning. Days turned into weeks. The drone visits became bolder, dropping lower, staying longer. The HOA started sending more violation letters, each more absurd than the last, as if trying to push him into submission. Some days it felt like psychological warfare, a slow tightening of control meant to break him. But instead of breaking, he began constructing the first steps of his revenge. He installed hidden infrared cameras around his property, invisible to the naked eye but perfect for capturing drone flight paths. He set up sound sensors to measure the drone's engine frequency. Every night, he cross-referenced his recordings with the HOA's email timestamps, uncovering the disturbing rhythm of surveillance to violation reporting. His evidence folder grew thicker with every passing day. And then came the discovery that changed everything. One evening, after weeks of tracking, he captured the drone descending behind the HOA clubhouse. It wasn't landing randomly, it was returning to its base. The clubhouse had always been suspicious, with its locked side room and restricted storage closet, but now the truth was undeniable. the drone was an HOA asset, operated from inside their headquarters. His suspicion turned into certainty when he found a brief reflection in one of his infrared snapshots, a person's silhouette inside the restricted side room, illuminated by the glow of a monitor showing multiple live drone feeds. The HOA had been running an illegal surveillance operation right under everyone's noses. The narrator knew quiet revenge wouldn't be enough. What the HOA was doing was bigger than just harassment. It was a violation of every homeowner in the community. They were being watched without their knowledge, every backyard, every moment, every daily routine secretly recorded. From that moment, the narrator's mission changed. This wasn't just about stopping them. It was about exposing them. The preparations for the final strike began. He backed up all his recordings, created mirrored copies, and hid them across multiple encrypted drives. He studied local drone laws, privacy legislation, and legal loopholes the HOA thought no one knew. The more he learned, the more monstrous their operation appeared. There were fines involved, legal consequences, even potential criminal charges, all waiting to be unleashed. But he didn't want to act impulsively. If he made one wrong move, the HOA could destroy the evidence, retaliate, or manipulate the community against him. He needed the perfect moment, the moment when their entire operation could be exposed publicly and undeniably. Were building their own case against themselves. And the narrator continued preparing, quietly weaving the final strands of a trap they would never see coming. As the drone hovered above his yard one last time that week, its light blinking through the darkness, the narrator looked up, not with fear, but with the certainty that everything was about to change. Because the next chapter of his plan wasn't just revenge. It was exposure. The next phase of the narrator's plan depended not on confrontation, but on patience. Exposing the HOA required precision, one mistake and they'd erase every trace of their wrongdoing. The narrator understood this clearly. So he watched, recorded, and waited as the drone continued its silent patrols, unaware that every movement was being logged into a growing archive of evidence. The HOA board, meanwhile, had become increasingly bold. Their violation letters escalated from petty accusations to aggressive fines, almost as if they were pushing the narrator to either submit or make a mistake. To them, he was just another homeowner who would eventually break under pressure. They had underestimated him. Their arrogance was the very thing that would bring about their downfall. In the days that followed, the narrator studied the HOA's internal habits with the same intensity he had applied to analyzing the drone. He noticed that the board members followed a set routine, arriving at the clubhouse early, leaving late, often staying inside their restricted side room for hours. He knew what they were doing in there. Monitoring. Reviewing drone footage. Preparing more violations. They believed they were invisible. They believed no one would question a system that had existed for years. But cracks had already begun to form. Some homeowners were starting to notice strange fines too, fines for leaves on roofs, for shadows from trees, for garden tools left out for minutes. The HOA's surveillance wasn't just targeting the narrator anymore. It had expanded. The pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. And that was exactly the kind of chaos he needed. The narrator's next move was subtle. He began pushing small hints into the community. Nothing obvious, just quiet whispers of suspicion. A neighbor mentioning a drone they'd seen. Another questioning how the HOA knew about something that wasn't visible from the street. The narrator fed curiosity carefully, planting seeds in conversation. Letting doubt spread naturally. A community didn't revolt overnight, but it did shift. Slowly. Gradually. Predictably. Meanwhile, his evidence pile grew stronger. One night, while reviewing footage, he captured the drone dipping unusually low, passing directly over the clubhouse roof. Its lights flickered briefly, and for the first time, he noticed a small identification tag beneath its frame. A serial number. Barely visible, but traceable. He zoomed in, enhanced it, and ran it through online drone registries. It wasn't registered to any recreational user. It wasn't licensed to a commercial operator. It was registered to a corporate entity that didn't exist on paper, an HOA shell company the board had created solely to hide their surveillance purchases. This was the breakthrough he needed. The narrator began assembling a complete report: drone footage, timestamps, violation letters tied to specific flights, serial number registry connections, HOA financial discrepancies, and illegal surveillance evidence. It was airtight. A report that could take down the entire board. But he wasn't ready to strike yet. He needed them to expose themselves even more. He needed undeniable, irrefutable proof that they were actively spying, not just accidentally flying over properties but intentionally recording homeowners without consent. So he set up a test. One night, he placed an object in his backyard, a harmless but unusual item that had no business being there. Something that would catch the drone's attention. Something that would make the HOA react. He carefully positioned it, ensuring it was only visible from above, then waited. Hours later, the drone arrived. It hovered, tilted, observed, and recorded. The narrator watched its movement through his infrared cameras, tracking its curiosity. After a few minutes, it retreated the same direction it always did, toward the clubhouse. The next morning, a new violation letter appeared in his mailbox. The HOA had seen the object and claimed it violated an obscure rule. They didn't realize they had just confirmed everything he suspected. Not only had they reacted exactly as he predicted, but their timing matched the drone's flight perfectly. The narrator documented the chain of events with meticulous detail. The trap was almost ready. His next step was bolder. He began preparing the community without revealing his plan. He gathered homeowners quietly, one at a time, sharing only the parts of the truth they needed to hear. He showed them examples of fines tied to drone activity, gently leading them to the truth without overwhelming them. Rumors began circulating faster than he could have hoped. People were angry, confused, scared. And when fear mixed with frustration, change became inevitable. The HOA board sensed the shift in the community. Instead of backing down, they doubled their surveillance efforts. The drone began flying more frequently. The violation letters grew more detailed, almost desperate. The board seemed convinced that tightening control would restore order. They didn't realize they were tightening the noose around their own operation. The narrator's final evidence collection came the night he decided to follow the drone's return path himself. Moving quietly through the dark, he kept a safe distance, tracking the faint red light as it drifted toward the clubhouse. He reached the bushes behind the building just as the drone descended into the restricted side room. For the first time, he saw everything with his own eyes. Inside the room were monitors, dozens of them. Live feeds from backyards, front yards, parks, and porches. Every corner of the neighborhood was under surveillance. Board members sat in front of the screens, reviewing footage, making notes, preparing reports. It wasn't just one drone. There were multiple drones lined up on charging stations, ready to launch. The narrator captured everything with a hidden camera. Every screen, every drone, every board member. The entire illegal operation caught red-handed. Now the evidence was complete. As he walked home under the silent night sky, he knew the next chapter would be the final strike. The moment the HOA would be forced to face everything they had done. The moment their secrets would crumble in front of the entire community. Because now it wasn't just about revenge. It was about justice. And sunrise would bring the reckoning. Morning arrived with a kind of stillness the neighborhood wasn't used to. Usually, the HOA patrol car circled the streets by sunrise, reminding everyone of the invisible rules that dictated their lives. But today felt different. The narrator woke early, not out of fear, but with the calm confidence that came when a plan had finally reached its final step. He opened his laptop and looked over the giant digital folder he had built over the last weeks, every drone recording, every HOA letter, every timestamp, every illegally monitored screen inside the clubhouse. The evidence was overwhelming. It wasn't just enough to expose the HOA, it was enough to collapse them completely. And today was the homeowners' monthly meeting. The narrator hadn't attended many HOA meetings before. Most residents didn't. They usually walked in, listened to the board talk down to everyone, nodded quietly, and left discouraged. But today would be different. Today, the attendees would not be quiet. Because the narrator had spent the entire previous evening sending out a single anonymous message, one that included previews of the truth. He didn't send everything. Just enough to shake the community awake. Screenshots of drone feeds. Their own backyards. Their own private moments. Their children playing. Their elderly parents gardening. These weren't violations. These weren't security measures. These were invasions. Violations of privacy so severe that even the quietest neighbors felt the shock run through them. By the time he reached the clubhouse, a crowd had already formed. Homeowners who rarely spoke now gathered with anxious expressions, murmuring among themselves. Some were holding printed copies of the screenshots. Others were pacing. But all of them were angry. The HOA board looked uneasy. They hadn't expected this turnout. They hadn't expected residents to show up early, whispering, glaring, demanding answers before the meeting even started. The board tried to maintain their composure, insisting everything would be discussed in order. But their voices trembled with an uncertainty they could no longer hide. When the meeting officially began, the room fell silent, not out of respect, but tension. The HOA president cleared her throat and tried to begin the usual announcements. But the narrator stepped forward before she finished her first sentence. He didn't give a speech. He didn't raise his voice. He simply placed a USB drive on the table in front of the board. The HOA president looked at it, frowning, confused. Then he quietly connected his laptop to the projector. The screen lit up instantly. And the room erupted. The first video that played was a drone hovering above a resident's backyard, recording them without permission. Gasps filled the room. Shock turned into outrage. Another video showed a board member monitoring multiple live feeds on a screen with timestamps matching violation letters. Then came the footage of the restricted side room, with drones lined up, monitors displaying private property angles, and the board discussing surveillance details like it was some covert government operation. The crowd exploded in anger. The HOA president tried to speak, but the narrator played another clip, the drone's serial number registry tied to the HOA's shell company. Then another clip, the drone landing behind the clubhouse. Then screenshots of violation letters time-stamped minutes after the drone passed over specific properties. Each new piece of evidence peeled away the board's excuses until nothing was left to defend. Homeowners began shouting, some demanding answers, others yelling for resignations, a few threatening legal action on the spot. The HOA board stood frozen. Their carefully constructed facade had shattered in front of the very people they believed they controlled. As the chaos swelled, the narrator stayed silent. His plan didn't require speeches. The truth spoke loud enough. When the HOA president finally tried to defend herself, homeowners cut her off, holding up copies of the drone footage. Accusations flew: privacy invasion, financial fraud, misuse of HOA funds, unauthorized surveillance. The board was surrounded, cornered not physically but by undeniable evidence, and an entire community united against them for the first time. It didn't take long before the board crumbled. One by one, they resigned, first the treasurer, then the vice president, then two members who tried to slip out unnoticed. The president held out longer, insisting on explanations, but her voice cracked every time she tried to justify the surveillance. Eventually, even she realized the truth: there was no explaining or repairing what they had done. She resigned too. The HOA's collapse was sudden and complete. But the narrator wasn't finished. After the meeting dispersed into heated side conversations and shocked discussions, he quietly submitted a digital report to the county authorities, complete with every piece of evidence the HOA had thought they could bury forever. Drone laws had been violated. Privacy laws broken. Financial misconduct documented. The legal consequences were out of his hands now. He had done his part. In the days that followed, the neighborhood transformed. Without the oppressive board, homeowners began speaking freely again. The air felt lighter. Friendlier. The drone never returned. The clubhouse's restricted room was locked down pending investigation. And slowly, the community realized something important: peace didn't come from control. It came from respect. The narrator didn't seek recognition. He didn't want a parade or applause. His revenge had already accomplished more than he imagined. The community was safe. The surveillance had ended. And the HOA shadow had finally lifted. But the biggest change wasn't in the neighborhood. It was inside the narrator himself. He had entered the conflict feeling watched, cornered, powerless. But he had emerged as someone who reclaimed not just his own rights, but the rights of everyone living around him. His revenge hadn't just exposed the HOA. It had freed the entire neighborhood. As he walked through the quiet streets one evening, the sunset reflecting off the now peaceful houses, he looked up at the sky instinctively. For the first time in weeks, the sky was empty. No drone. Just peace. And the story, his story, had finally ended exactly the way it needed to.